The pilot and the vessel's master frantically order rudder commands to counter the list. As the deck crew watches in horror, the rate of turn to starboard increases and the vessel heels over to port, reaching a 60-degree list in less than a minute. Golden Ray was a vehicle carrier built in South Korea in 2017. The 200-meter-long roll-on, roll-off vessel had a beam of 35 meters. It was registered and operated under the flag of the Republic of Marshall Islands for its favorable tax environment and greater operational freedom. It was powered by a single diesel engine, giving a service speed of 19.5 knots and could carry over 7,400 vehicles. It was manned by 23 crew members. Golden Ray had 15 decks, 12 of which were enclosed vehicle storage decks, with the bridge, crew accommodation, loading ramps and doors, stairways and mooring stations strategically placed on the remaining decks. On the 27th of August 2019, Golden Ray docks in Freeport, Texas to offload a portion of its vehicle cargo, load new cargo, and change about a third of its crew members. The following day, the new crew members take over their posts on the vessel. Captain Ji-Hak Lee takes over command of Golden Ray as the new master, along with the 8 new crew members. On the 30th of August, Golden Ray departs Freeport for stops in Brunswick, Georgia, then Jacksonville, Florida, and on to Baltimore, Maryland. Shortly after departing Freeport, the vessel's leaseholder, Hyundai Glovis Company Limited, notifies Captain Lee that Hurricane Dorian is heading up the east coast of Florida. To prepare for the storm and stabilize the vessel, Captain Lee instructs the chief officer to load additional ballast. The chief engineer takes on 1,500 tons of seawater into the vessel's ballast tanks. Golden Ray then waits out the storm off the coast of Key West, Florida, from the 1st to the 3rd of September, allowing the hurricane to pass. On the 3rd of September, the leaseholder directs Captain Lee to head to Jacksonville instead of Brunswick to offload and load cargo. To enter the port of Jacksonville, the chief officer discharges the 1,500 tons of seawater ballast to reduce Golden Ray's draft to less than 9.4 meters. The draft of the ship is the height below the waterline. On the 7th of September, Golden Ray departs Jacksonville en route to Brunswick. The vehicle carrier arrives at the port of Brunswick that afternoon, and Jonathan Tennant, or JT, a state pilot from the Brunswick Bar Pilots Association, boards Golden Ray to bring the vessel into port. At 17:36, Golden Ray docks at berth 1 on the Colonel's Island terminal in Brunswick. Shore personnel and the vessel's crew begin offloading and loading vehicles using the stern ramp. Golden Ray has 4,161 vehicles on board. The chief officer makes sure all the vehicles are properly stowed and secured in accordance with the preload plan. By 23:30, the crew has completed the cargo operations and the chief officer supervises the preparations for Golden Ray's departure. The vessel has a slight list of 0.42 degrees to port. Since their fuel tanks are near full, he doesn't take on additional ballast water. Instead, he uses the existing water in the ballast tanks to transfer 8 tons from the portside tank to the starboard tank, resulting in a 0.03 degree list to starboard. The Port of Brunswick pilot rotation is 24 hours long and arranged so that the same pilot who guides a vessel into port will guide it out after the cargo operations are complete. The crew are familiar with the pilot and the pilot is familiar with the vessel. Just after midnight on the 8th of September, JT boards Golden Ray. He heads to the bridge where he finds Captain Lee, along with the second officer in charge of navigation, the quartermaster who steers the vessel, and a cadet who's in training. During the master pilot briefing, JT notes the draft of the vessel is 9.4 meters, which is the same as when it entered the previous day. But as this still meets the required minimum underkeel clearance of 0.9 meters in the 11-meter deep channel, he ignores it. JT does a pre-departure check using his tablet, which provides him with a navigation chart and an automatic identification system interface that displays headings, speeds, and rates of turn for Golden Ray and other nearby vessels, as well as tidal flow and water depth information. The weather is good, partly cloudy, with visibility up to 10 miles and light winds of 4 knots. The pilot begins maneuvering Golden Ray away from the quay and into the harbor with the help of a tug, Dorothy Moran. At 0100, Golden Ray proceeds outbound in the Turtle River lower range at 6 knots. Dorothy Moran stays with Golden Ray to provide support as needed. While Golden Ray is transiting outbound, another vehicle carrier, the Emerald Ace, is heading inbound to enter the channel with another Port of Brunswick pilot commanding the vessel. The two pilots communicate via radio and plan for the vessels to meet halfway at the Plantation Creek range of St. Simon's Sound. This is a common practice for the pilots because it's the widest portion of the waterway where vessels are able to pass each other. As Golden Ray passes under Sydney Linear Bridge at 0108, the Dorothy Moran stops to wait for the inbound Emerald Ace to escort and assist the inbound vessel. Golden Ray proceeds outbound in the Brunswick Point Cut range on a course of 113 degrees. Captain Lee orders his crew to open the portside pilot door, which is located on deck 5. Once they're outside the Port of Brunswick at the Seaboy, the pilot will disembark. The pilot door is a hydraulic watertight hatch 2.1 meters high and 2.1 meters wide on the side of the vessel. It's one of 13 watertight hatches and 17 watertight doors throughout Golden Ray. After supervising the opening of the portside pilot door, the chief officer retires to his stateroom. The crew continue with their duties, leaving the door open as the vessel proceeds outbound. 22 minutes later, Golden Ray approaches Cedar Hammock Range and the pilot orders a 20-degree turn to port to navigate the left turn into Cedar Hammock Range. At 0128, the pilot again orders a 20-degree turn to port to enter the Jekyll Island Range. As Golden Ray approaches the right turn at Widener 11, JT adjusts the heading to 0.44 degrees at a speed of 12.9 knots. A Widener is a turn or bend in a channel that provides additional width to allow vessels to navigate a turn easily. At 0136, JT initiates the turn by ordering starboard 10 or rudder at 10 degrees to the right as they enter Plantation Creek Range, which heads out to the Atlantic Ocean. The helmsman complies with the turn and also increases the vessel's speed to 13.3 knots. JT realizes the turn is too slow and gives an order starboard 20. Golden Ray swings quickly to the right and takes on a list to port. As the ship turns to the right, it starts to tilt over to the left. JT immediately orders the rudder amidship or back to center to slow down or stop the turn to the right. The helmsman reverses the wheel, but the vessel doesn't respond and continues turning to the right. To the surprise of everyone on the bridge, Golden Ray becomes unstable and continues heeling hard over to port. JT calls out, "What's the metacentric height of this thing?" A metacentric height is the vessel's stability to keep it from capsizing when it heels or tilts over. A vessel with a higher stability value will roll quickly back to its center of gravity. A smaller value will take a longer time for the vessel to correct itself. Since the vessel isn't responding to centering the rudder, Captain Lee intervenes and issues a port 10 order, a move in the opposite direction. Golden Ray still doesn't respond and continues turning to starboard, and instead of correcting itself, it inclines even more to the left. The pilot and master swiftly issue additional rudder commands to the helmsman. Port 20, then 30 seconds later, hard to port, or full turn to the left, in an attempt to counter the heeling and return to an upright position. But the ship doesn't respond, and the list increases to 35 degrees on the ship's heeling indicator as it continues to turn to the right. The open portside pilot door on deck 5 is submerged below the waterline, and water enters deck 5, flowing freely on the low side of the vessel. The pilot issues orders to engage the vessel's bow thruster and the engine to full astern in an attempt to stop the vessel from heeling any further. With such a steep list, everything on the bridge that's not secured is thrown against the port bridge window. Golden Ray's list reaches 45 degrees. The main propulsion system and electrical generator shut down, triggering alarms throughout the ship. At 0140, Golden Ray grinds to a halt, lying on its port side at a 60-degree incline outside the channel, southeast of buoy 19. The emergency diesel generator kicks in, then shuts down less than a minute later, leaving the vessel in darkness with no power and only the flashing lights from the alarms. The bridge wing of the ship slowly fills with water. Water continues to flow through the open portside pilot door, flooding deck 5. Golden Ray is sinking. In the engine room compartment, the first and second engineer are in the control room on deck 4. The third engineer and the cadet engineer are in the engine room on a lower deck. As Golden Ray settles on its port side, the two engineers on the lower deck try to make their way to the fourth deck to reach the emergency exit. The first and second engineer in the engine control room head for the emergency exit up the mid-port side stairway. As they enter the stairway, water from the open pilot door on deck 5 comes rushing towards them. The engineers in both sections climb to the starboard side to avoid water flooding the port side compartments. On the bridge, Captain Lee tries to make an announcement but is cut off when the emergency power is lost. The bridge is plunged into darkness and he can't contact his crew members. His handheld radio has dropped to the deck below the port bridge window. He calls out to his crew members, but nobody answers. Nobody moves, trapped in the darkness, frozen from shock and fear that the ship will slip deeper into the channel. The quartermaster is at the helm and the second officer is in front of the radar holding onto the hand railings. JT shouts out while he clings to the gyro with his feet solidly planted on the deck. Like the others on the bridge, he can't let go or he'll slip into the flooding port bridge wing. He can't reach the ship's radio nor sound the alarm, but he has his handheld radio in his pocket. He calls the pilot on Emerald Ace to raise the alarm. JT instructs him to contact the Moran tugboat waiting at the Sydney Linear Bridge. JT knows that if Golden Ray slides further into the deep channel, everyone will drown. He needs the tugboat to push the vessel onto the sandbar, and quickly. At 0154, Emerald Ace's pilot contacts the tugboats and calls 911 emergency services to report the incident. 911 dispatches a 14-meter response boat from the Coast Guard boat station in Brunswick, along with a Coast Guard helicopter, first responders from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources and Glynn County, and vessels from Seatow, a local salvage contractor. JT then calls the US Coast Guard in Charleston on his radio. The pilot requests assistance describing their situation, location, and that their vessel is a large carrier. JT relays important information they're able to gather from Captain Lee and the crew. 24 people on board, including the pilot, no fatalities, 2 seriously hurt, and 4 trapped in the engine room. Shortly after that, the pilot boats from the port and 2 tugs from Moran Towing arrive on the scene. JT gives them instructions via radio to push the Golden Ray to the bank to prevent it from sliding into the channel and sinking into deeper water. He instructs them to push on the transom or stern area of the ship and not the starboard side or the keel, which could capsize the vessel. The tugboat captains hesitate. They need to get Coast Guard authorization to intervene in this way during an emergency. JT shouts down the radio, "This vessel is in distress and you're a tugboat master. You need to render aid. Push me to the sandbar." But the 2 captains refuse because of possible legal implications. So JT calls the Coast Guard directly, asking them to give authorization to the tugboat captains immediately. The tugs get the go-ahead from the Coast Guard and start to push Golden Ray onto the sandbar while the pilot boats assess the progress and report back to JT. The tugs keep pushing until Golden Ray is stable and firmly on the sandbar. In the pitch-dark engine room compartments, the engineers feel uncomfortable because of the extreme heat on the upper starboard side where they're waiting for rescue. Hot air from the engine is rising to the top of the engine room, and the heat is spreading throughout the starboard side of the ship. The 2 groups of engineers are separated by a glass blast-proof enclosure, but there's a door midway joining the rooms. The water has reached the midway door, but not yet covered it. Using their flashlights, they move to the midway point and plunge into the oil-filled water to cool themselves down. The second engineer reunites with the third engineer and the cadet at the midway point, all 3 men in the water. The first engineer decides to stay where he is. As the water rises, the passageway between the compartments is submerged, separating the first engineer from his 3 colleagues on the other side. At 0205, responders arrive on the scene. Over the next hour, 11 crew members, including the master and pilot, are lowered using a fire hose as a makeshift rope from the bridge wing of Golden Ray down to the Coast Guard response boat. 5 other crew members are rescued by other vessels in the water, and the Coast Guard helicopter hoists 2 crew members to safety from the starboard side of the vessel. The master tells the rescuers that the 4 engineers are trapped in the engine room. At 0300, a second Coast Guard response boat arrives to assist with the search and rescue. The Coast Guard send one of their response boats to transport the rescued crew members back to the station, while the other continues to search for the remaining crew. Golden Ray is lying on its port side. Some of the 4,000 vehicles in its cargo hold have been dislodged by the impact. Most are hanging by their lashings. Vehicles in transit have fuel in their tanks, no more than 25%, but now that fuel starts to leak from the damaged cars. At 0430, thick black smoke and flames rise from the starboard side of Golden Ray, slowing down the search for the engineers. The cargo hold is full of combustible materials, tires, plastic in the vehicles, and fuel which feed the fire. The chief engineer is trapped in a cabin below the port bridge wing. He makes his way to a window and sees one of the Coast Guard response boats. He ties the extension cord of the vacuum cleaner and a refrigerator together and throws the makeshift line to the response boat. A responder ties a mooring line to the end of the extension cords, and the chief engineer pulls up the line. He ties it off and climbs down to the boat. By 0645, a total of 20 people on board have been rescued and brought to the Coast Guard station in Brunswick, where they are treated by emergency medical services and transferred to a local hospital. The chief engineer briefs the rescuers on the exact location of the 4 missing engineers and the layout of the engine room. Because of the fire, the rescuers aren't able to enter the inner deck. Water continues to flood into the vessel. At 0930, the hull shifts and the ship rolls to 90 degrees. First responders hear loud crashes from inside Golden Ray as vehicle lashings give way. At 1812, 16 hours after the accident, first responders hear tapping noises on the hull. The following day, on the 9th of September, the fire burns itself out. The Coast Guard, along with other rescue units, drew up a plan to free the engineers. It'll take 14 hours to get cold cutting equipment on site. It's summer, and the temperature in the day is as high as 34 degrees Celsius. At 1300, the responders drill a 6-centimeter hole through the hull to contact the trapped engineers. Hot air billows from inside the vessel. The rescuers compare it to opening an oven. They take a temperature reading from inside the hull. 68 degrees Celsius. Realizing the temperature is extremely dangerous, the rescuers decide not to wait for cold cutting equipment. But they can't use a torch, which might ignite fumes from the fuel inside the ship. So they use a drill to punch more than 40 holes side by side to cut a hatch into the hull. By 1500, the rescuers have made an access opening into the hull large enough to fit a ladder. 2 of the engineers climb out on their own, but the third is so weak that he has to be carried out. The rescuers make their way to the control room, where the first engineer is trapped inside a blast-proof glass area. Using a diamond-tipped handheld cutter, the rescuers patiently score the blast-proof glass until they're able to breach it. At 1751, the last crew member emerges from the hull of Golden Ray. All of the engineering crew, except for one, are in good condition. A second fire is reported at 1800, burning in the vehicle decks, but the fire burns itself out that night. Golden Ray sustained significant damage from the fire, flooding, and saltwater corrosion, and declared a total loss estimated at $62.5 million. The vehicle cargo loss was estimated at $142 million. The NTSB investigation concluded that Golden Ray's accident was caused by the chief officer's error when he entered the incorrect ballast values into the stability calculation program. Contributing to the accident was the vessel operator, G Marine Service, who didn't have an effective procedure in their safety management system to verify stability calculations. And the crew didn't carry out the arrival-departure checklist on watertight doors. The portside pilot door, along with watertight doors to both the aft and mid-portside deck 5 stairways, were open at the time of the accident and had been since before the vessel departed the Colonel's Island terminal.